So I'm Hank Evans, Henry Evans, Juris Doctorate, and holding a master's degree from here at Washington State University. Today I'll be presenting on esport immigration alternatives for international gamers. And this is an area that I've taken up recently. I presented last summer at NASM in a sport management conference on players' rights and players' associations for esport athletes. And it was kind of in that presentation or through that study that esport immigration issues sort of started to appear, or I started to have questions of this, so I paired up with an attorney and just asked him a few questions. One of my friends is an immigration attorney in Seattle, and so I said, would you be interested in kind of running through some basic immigration visas and the potential opportunities here, because it turns out there's a lot. And so that kind of sparked my interest in this, and then I've taken it from a quick phone conversation with him to where it is today. I'm still working on this study. It's a work in progress. It's definitely not finalized, but we are sort of progressing towards a finished product. So, without too much more on how I got here, we'll talk about why I think it's important. Right? How did you get here now? Why is it important? It kind of starts 2016. We start to see the amount of money that people are playing for, the tournaments becoming a lot more valuable, and a lot more attention being paid to esport gaming tournaments. Prior to 2016, we weren't really getting a lot of information about immigration status or issue or immigration status or immigration issues in esports. And in 2016, we had a few teams from the League of Legends Championship Series, both in Europe and North America, sort of suffer at the hands of a denied visa. So we had players from First Echo Fox, which is our North American team, Unicorns of Love, and Rocat, the European teams, all sort of unable to participate in league championships due to visa issues. They had international players playing for their teams, and they could not make it into the United States because they were denied their visas. And so I think about this and I'm like, what if this happened in baseball or in soccer or in any major traditional sport, right, which we have seen it happening in weightlifting and some other sort of maybe traditional but non-traditional or maybe not power sports. And I thought, well, wouldn't that just be crazy? And then I thought maybe this would be the end of it, so a little bit more research showed that through 2017, 2018, there was something like 150 denied teams that were denied access to or participation in tournaments because of visa issues. And most recently, we have Zhang Zihao, hopefully that's close enough to the participation, denied his visa for the 2019 season. The entire season, he's sort of been denied unless he can reapply in the Overwatch League Championship Series. So we see this is kind of an interesting area. A quick rundown of the top 100 highest earning esports athletes shows that there are 10 Americans on the list. So 10% of the top 100 earners are American, the other 90% are abroad. Now, when you pair that with most of the games happening, or a large majority of the tournaments and the leagues occurring here in the United States, you see that there are a high amount of people immigrating into the country, trying to enter the country in order to participate. So I think that this is what makes it sort of the most valuable. Now, we also see esports on the rise, a lot more attention being paid to the esports scene. Esport revenues will hit by the end of the year $1.1 billion. There's been projections as high as $1.5 billion, which is about a third of the size of the NBA. And this is, it's increased 27% since last year. And so if we continue that trend, then esports are projected to overtake basketball in just a few short years. And this is generally due to, well, they're starting to get advertisement, sponsorship, and media rights over their competitive video gaming. Deloitte, I imagine. Deloitte. Shout out to Linda, which is one of the big four accounting firms in the world. Estimates the esport industry will reach global revenues of $1.5 billion and have a fan base of 600 million by 2020 as well. Now with this, we see this exponential growth, we see everything sort of on the rise. I believe the U.S. immigration system is overburdening this sort of emerging market that could contribute greatly to the U.S. economy. Having these tournaments in the United States can only be a benefit, and bringing players in from all over the world to compete just brings more and more attention to the current system. So the research, just some background information on the research. I did take the stance, or my belief is that professional gamers should be able to enter the United States to compete in esports tournaments under either the P1 or the O1 visas, which we'll get into more here shortly. Now, most professional gamers, right, I think that they should be subjected to the same limits that all professional athletes are subjected to, and background checks and the various sort of things that the systems that they go through. But I think that this should be something, and I think that this should be more consistent, and so that was the stance I took in doing the research. I didn't sort of approach this with a open, I guess, I had an open mind, but I had sort of a purpose behind the research, and I think that has kind of influenced my decisions or my results. And the goal of this research is to outline the appropriateness of certain immigrant and non-immigrant visas for use by esport athletes, and also to suggest potential reforms to our current system. I think that, right, there is a burden that's being placed on esports by immigration, and I think that we could change that, and I think we should try to change that in order to sort of stay or keep esports here in the United States and to stay competitive in that area. Esports are going to be a medaled event at the 2022 Asian Games, and they are on the slate for the 2024 Paris Olympics. I think that's right, 2024 is Paris, 2028 is London.
It's Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
Demonstration sport.
Right, yeah, so for Paris. And with that, right, it would just be, I think it would be a big blow to the United States in competitiveness as well. So, just getting started here, non-U.S. citizen members of esport teams require some form of visa to enter into the country to participate in major tournaments held into U.S. soil. Just basic immigration. If you want to come into the country, you have to have some type of visa to allow you that. If you don't have that visa, we're talking about a different sort of entry, and that's also sort of not what we're looking for. Now, luckily for esport athletes, generally people from foreign countries, there are 185 different types of U.S. visas. So when you're looking through the list of how can I enter into the country, you have 185 choices, which makes it very difficult to determine the proper avenue. Now, through my research, I've kind of come up with, I think, the 5 or 6 most likely options for esport professionals or esport athletes to use in order to enter the country for participation. And out of those 185, right, I think these are the best ones. So we'll start off here with the best option, which is the athlete visa, or the P1A visa. Now, the P1A visa provides athletes with the opportunity to stay in the country as long as necessary to complete the event, competition, or performance. Now, the event or competition can be leagues, it can be NBA, MLB, NFL, whatever sort of performance or competition that you are involved in, and it's as long as necessary to complete that. So if you sign a contract with an NBA team for 5 years, you can have that visa extended through the entire 5 years, barring any sort of major action on your part that would deem you unworthy of that visa. Now, there's the P1A visa, and following that's the P1A or P1B visa, which is for the spouse and children of the P1A holder. And this just allows for spouse and children to accompany our P1A athlete, our professional athlete, to the United States, and they can stay for school, but neither can work. So your children, wife cannot work in the system. All that's required to get a P1A visa is that you perform at a specific athletic competition as an athlete, individually, right, either individually or as part of a team, and at an internationally recognized level or performance. So coming to Washington State University to play in intramurals probably wouldn't cut it. As great as the intramurals are here at WSU, I don't think that they'll sort of reach this internationally recognized level. And when you look at sort of world championships, Dota 2, Fortnite, League of Legends, they're playing for millions of dollars. They have hundreds of millions of viewers. Right, the 2019 League of Legends World Championship peaked at 109 million viewers, unique viewers to the event at one shot, which is similar to the viewership of the Super Bowl. And so you'd say, okay, they seem to check all of these boxes. However, and unfortunately, maybe that's a positive for me, it doesn't end here. It's not really a great fit because P1A visas visa petitions are not always granted, even for the internationally recognized athletes. Weightlifters from Iran may not make the cut. Esport athletes from South Korea, Europe, China may not make the cut, regardless of their recognition as prominent figures in these in their respective fields. Now, P1A visas are generally granted on a case-by-case basis. They don't use sort of the Latin term of stare decisis, meaning like the precedent that's been set. So, former decisions that were made on this don't impact the decisions they make today. So if one esport athlete does get a P1A visa, the next person might not. They won't use the successful petition in their decision. Now, these decisions are granted on a case-by-case basis by a counselor officer who acts both as a judge and a jury, using traditional the definition of an athlete that may not include esports. And so you'll have a variety of counselor officers who are going to make these decisions, they'll look through the petitions, and then they'll make the decision. Now they're both the judge and the jury. They say yes, it's okay, or no, it's not, and then they're sort of not questioned about why. And so we see a lot of inconsistency here, and these esport athletes are heavily affected by that. Right? It can not only result in losses for you. If you're not participating, you don't get to demonstrate your talents and your exceptional skill, which could lead to loss of contract. Maybe your entire team doesn't get to participate in the World Championship. Dota 2 last year played for $26 million. The winning team received $26 million, which was just over $5 million per person. 5 people teams. So you're looking at about $5 million per person. And if you're the guy who doesn't get the visa, your entire team is forced to forfeit, and there's no participation. And so we see heavy effects sort of coming down from this. So when the P1A is not available, this is when my research really kicks in, because, well, if you can't get the P1A, what do? So I looked through and I came up with a few that I think are the best, and sort of demonstrate why they're not. So the first that I came up with is the P1A and the P1 and B1 and B2. Cool. Sorry. And these have been used in the past. We've seen a lot of consistency. Following a denial of the P1A visa, a lot of people will come in and say, okay, I'll get a B visa. And these are the sort of tourism and sort of vacation visas. You come in as a tourist and you participate. Now the issue with this is that during these visas, you cannot receive more than a reasonable allowance during your stay. So if you show up, maybe you use this on a business trip and you're coming over, you work for a company in Japan, Toyota, you're coming to the United States to do something with the American Toyota factory. During that time, you can receive your normal compensation, but you couldn't be additionally compensated. Now, with esport athletes, they come in under this sort of tourist, I'm coming for personal pleasure, and they compete and they train and they receive their salaries from their teams and their sponsorships, and everything is okay until their team wins. And when they win, that sort of seems to violate this reasonable allowance clause, or at least it's been held to violate this reasonable allowance clause, because the athletes now are competing for an additional source of income, the winnings of the tournament, which makes this sort of a scratch. So while it's been used in the past, we see a lot of violations resulting from this. And the issue with the violations is that it comes with, generally you get deported, and following a deportation, you're not allowed entry into the United States for a certain amount of time, which can limit your future participation in these events. So while it has been used in the past, generally you would not want to encourage people to use it now. Either the B1, which is the business, or the B2, which is the vacation, pleasure trip into the United States. So I said, okay, scratch B1, B2, even though it is a better option than some of the other ones. And I thought, maybe the H-1B. Now this is kind of a famous visa in the United States. The H-1B visa is one that primarily is used for individuals employed by United States employers, which could theoretically benefit players who are employed by the United States esports teams. So if you own the team and you're here in the United States, you can employ foreign participants or foreign players to come and play for your team. And theoretically, we have a fit here. But further research sort of shows us that the H-1B visa is generally reserved for specialty occupations that require theoretical and practical application of a body of specialized knowledge. Now, I still haven't written esport athletes off here. Understanding the games that they're playing, having the technical abilities to play those games is all very specialized. Being a esport athlete, if we'll quote the term athlete because it still is up in the air whether they are or are not, which is why they're denied the P1A visa. And so having this sort of specialty occupation where you work for an esport team, you play in an esport league under the sort of premise that you're one of the best in the world, I still think can fit in with the H-1B visa. So specialized knowledge and attainment of a, now the second part is the attainment of a bachelor's or higher degree in the specific specialty or its equivalent as minimum for entry into the occupation of the United States. So I know you think to yourself, it's a wash, Hank, can't do this one. Not so fast, right? With the H-1B visa, the equivalent means work in the industry. And so if they sort of attribute 3 years of general experience, of work experience, to 1 year of education under these sort of this sort of program. And so if you were to be an esport athlete working for a team for 12 years, you could sort of have the equivalent of that bachelor's or higher degree through your participation. So continuing on with this, now unfortunately we don't see a lot of esport athletes meeting that specialty occupation, holding the required degree, because they're normally high school or just out of high school, young college age, in that sort of age range. The current Fortnite world champion is a sophomore in high school. So he played in the Fortnite championship, won the world, took home $3.2 million as a 16-year-old, does not hold our sort of required bachelor's degree as a minimum, or 12 years of experience because he's 16 years old. A lot of other players are also sort of in that sort of area, and not to mention, esports as a profession has not been around for the 12 years maybe required of being accepted as a form of, as a true occupation in order to receive these 12 years. Now further, the sort of other issue that we run into with the H-1B visa is that it's capped at $65,000 a year, and it's usually that cap is met within a few weeks of it becoming available to petition. So within 1 month of them opening up the H-1B visas, the $65,000 is 65,000 people, not dollars, is going to be met, and they will be no longer accepting petitions for these visas, which kind of causes the H-1B visa to not be ideal, but I think that it's still an option for certain players who maybe have that sort of bachelor's degree in a specific area. With esports sort of coming up, we're starting to see more of a focus on this in academics, so within a few years, this could be a very prime area for esport players to sort of petition for. Now we get into the two areas where I think are most successful. We start with the O1A visa, and these are just those extraordinary people. You've met them, you've heard of them, the international basketball players or soccer players, Zlatan Abramovich coming over, from Europe to play in the United States. He's playing because he's an extraordinary person. He has an unbelievable talent. He's one of the best who's ever done it. He's internationally recognized as so. If Messi wanted to come and play in the MLS, it would be no problem for him to achieve this or to obtain this visa. Now, when we read this, individuals with extraordinary ability or achievement, it takes more than my sort of recognition of you to get that. Extraordinary ability refers to a level of expertise indicating that the individual is one of the small percentage who have risen to the very top of the field of endeavor. So if you're in esports and you're playing in esports, you have to show that you're one of the very, very best, a small percentage who've risen to the top. Now, generally, we look at being a professional in a sport, being drafted or recruited by a professional sports team is enough for that. If, Giannis, the Greek freak, playing for the Bucks, right, was recruited, we're not going to question whether or not he is actually one of the best in the world. We're going to take the Bucks' word for it. Now, this doesn't always apply with esports, or rarely applies to esports, because it's hard to sort of demonstrate that you are an athlete. You are a person of extraordinary achievement in the field of athletics, because we're not sure if esports are athletes. We look for an award of some sort, best player in the world, best high school, best college player, whatever it may be. And the athlete must demonstrate extraordinary ability by sustained national or international acclaim, and must be coming temporarily to the United States to continue work in the area of extraordinary ability. Esport athletes fit this very well. They're the best in the world. They're coming to play in sort of the biggest leagues in the world, and we have our O1A visa, where I think we can see a lot of success for athletes, and we have seen it. Now the issue is that some get accepted under the P1A, some don't, and we don't have rationale for why. Same thing with the O1A. But it kind of hangs up on the idea of whether or not they're athletes in these fields. So, is being one of the best enough? We had a case, Muni versus the INS, in which we had a professional soccer or hockey player who was denied his O1A visa. He applied for an O1A visa and he was denied. So he appealed the decision, and they went to court. Now the court held that because Muni had played a key role in 3 Stanley Cup winning teams, that was enough for him to qualify under the O1A visa. 2 issues that we have with this holding. The first is there is no true definition of key role. Is being a player on the team enough? 15th guy off the bench for a basketball world championship, is that a key role if you never were on the field, but you were a part of the practices and the development of your championship team? Or is that not enough? Is that not quite the key role? Do you have to be the star of the team? And so we don't have a true definition for the key role. And the second issue is that when you're looking at winning teams, do you look for winning world championships, or is winning leagues enough? Is winning more minor tournaments? Because there are plenty of esport tournaments that are being held around the world, and so what level of tournament do you have to win in order to qualify under this? And this question sort of came to mind, or as I sort of looked through this case, the thing that I thought of is, how is this different from having distinction? Being distinct, being a special player in a special field. And that's what leads us to the visa I think esport athletes should use the most. If they're denied for a P1A visa, or P1A, we get to the O1B visa. And these are for, long title, individuals with an extraordinary ability in the arts or extraordinary achievement in motion picture and the television industry. Hank, these guys aren't television or movie stars. What are you thinking of? Well, let's just look through this, because I think that this may be, if you're denied your athlete status as an esport professional, maybe you can claim that you are a performing artist. If esport athletes are not seen as athletes, maybe they're performing artists. Twitch streamers and other major professional players could reach this status of performing artists. They perform regularly for 10, 20, 30,000 people who are watching them stream on a regular basis. 8 million people a month may watch Ninja stream, or might watch Uzi stream, and just tune in to watch them play. Now through that, I think that we can sort of determine they're performing artists. Second question comes from the qualifier of extraordinary ability or extraordinary achievement in this area. Now Twitch streamers, they could reach this status. In order to do so, the athlete must earn a high level of distinction evidenced by a degree of skill and recognition substantially above ordinary in their field. So I still think esport athletes, streamers are checking that box. If in your field of esports, you are streaming for 10,000 people on a regular basis, you're affiliated, you're getting subscribers, people paying $5 a month to watch you stream, and the average is having 25 people view your stream or 40 people view your stream, you could say there is sort of recognition that's substantially above the ordinary. Again, we're dealing with definitions here of what is ordinary, what is substantially above, but I think that we may be able to still check another box here. General reservations for this, this sort of O1B visas, are people who've won Academy Awards, Emmys, Grammys, or Guild or Directors Guild Award winners. Esport athletes probably not going to check that box. So Hank, why would you pick this? Because there's another option available. If you don't have a Grammy, if you don't have an Emmy, if you're not an award-winning director, you can demonstrate distinction in the field through any combination of the following. Evidence of a record of major commercial activity. And so with this sort of first one, being a Twitch streamer, being affiliated, having the recognition of a major streaming platform would likely be enough to show that you have a record of major commercial activity. Last year, Ninja made $5.4 million through his Twitch stream. Playing video games on TV, he made $5.4 million. New developers of games will pay Ninja more than $50,000 an hour. $50,000 an hour to play their new video game on his stream. And I think that you could say major commercial activity, right? You could show a lot of athletes, or a lot of esport players and streamers may be able to qualify for that. Second is evidence of significant recognition for achievements from organizations or other recognized experts in the field. Again, I think that we're looking at the mass amount of viewership that these players are receiving. 8 million views over the course of a year, unique viewers to your channel over the course of a year could show a major sort of recognition. Twitch also does, Twitch being the major streaming platform, they also do levels of viewership and levels of affiliation. The more viewers that you have on a regular basis, the higher you move in the field, and reaching a certain level of that, reaching a certain achievement, completing a certain quest, may be able to get you that sort of recognition. The third one here, evidence of having commanded a high salary or other significantly high remuneration for services. $5 million a year in streaming, $50,000 an hour, right, would sort of command this high salary. And if most players are sort of earning that, I think that you would say they've been able to achieve this as a performing artist for their Twitch and live broadcasts of their gameplay, and other comparable evidence. So this is our catch-all, where if you've done something special, you've won a certain award, you've had certain achievements in the field, maybe it's winning the tournaments while you're performing, right? You are performing your sort of art in terms of your gameplay, your reactions to other players, and the sort of dance that may be going on there could also sort of be used in this demonstration for distinction. And this is why I think this might be the best fit. Now, my current conclusion right now is that if an esport athlete is denied the P1A visa, this should be their sort of main approach to receiving entry into the United States. It was designed by athletes, but until esport participants, esport athletes are seen as true athletes or athletes under the traditional definition, right, we have to have other options. So if they have a denial of the P1A visa, they should pursue the O1B visa rather than the O1A, the H1B, or the B1s and 2 visa options. I think that this provides them with the greatest chance of success in obtaining proper documentation for entry into the United States for purposes of esport participation. Participating in leagues, participating in tournaments, coaching, teaching, whatever it is that they do. And our last little bit here, the conclusion, because I said I would make suggestions on how we can sort of change the system. How can we make this more available to the athletes? The first thing, right, in order to lighten the current load, the burden that I mentioned in the first slide, the current immigration system is putting on the esport industry, consistency is key. If they're going to consistently deny athletes the P1A visa, then we should sort of look into the other visas and see how they fit there, and look for consistency in either the acceptance or denial. So allowing esport athletes to use the P1 and O1 visas consistently by creating a clear definition of the term athlete is the first sort of step. And in order to do that, I think that we need, my sort of call here would be for increased training and discussion from the US CIS. Adjudicators are a broad swath from the American demographic. They make up a wide variety of us in the United States. And because of this, you have a lot of differing definitions and differing opinions on what athletes truly are and what it means to be an athlete or to play a sport. And so because of this, if we could have stakeholders from the USCIS having communication with esports stakeholders, whether that be the leagues the players are participating in, the players themselves, the team owners, or lawyers working the cases, and then distributing that sort of information and the results of those open communications and those listening sessions with the adjudicators in order to have a more consistent immigration policy. I think that would be the best thing for esports and for immigration. And so, like I said, still working on this study now. It's not a finished product, but a working product. And that's it for my sort of presentation there. So if you have any questions, I would like to hear them. I'll do my best to answer them. But
Hank, I have a question about, does the type of visa you have any determination on the taxation that the United States puts on their winnings?
well, and I think that that's why, yes, if you have the proper visa and the proper documentation, then the government does get to sort of receive a portion of that in the taxes that you pay for your earnings while here in the United States. But your status, whether you have the P1A visa or the O1B visa, wouldn't sort of change. It would be more of how much money you made, and then you'd be sort of taxed accordingly in those brackets, is my understanding of the tax system with that. So I don't think it would be so much a tax issue, but more of keeping the esports tournaments here, and that's why I said it would be such a big thing for the economy, is receiving any of those benefits of having major tournaments in the United States, broadcasting deals, and potential taxation would be a positive thing.
The tournament money, is a lot of that from foreign companies, or is it all American companies?
A lot of it comes from both. I would say it's a mix between the leagues and the developers. So Dota, for example, their sort of money comes, a percentage of it comes from in-game purchases. So every time you're playing the game and you buy something, a certain percentage of that goes towards the big International, which is the name of their world championship or the final tournament of the year, and then that goes into the prize pool. Sponsorship deals go into the same sort of pool, and so you might have Rakuten, Amazon, and Alibaba all sort of sponsoring a tournament, and all of that money sort of going into that. So it can be a lot of international money as well.
Has the fact that there is so much international influence, both players and sponsorship and tournaments, has that influenced the number of tournaments that are held in the United States? Or is maybe I should rephrase this, is our visa program causing major tournaments to turn away from the United States?
I think that we see like an impact from this, where if you have 130 teams that were denied access or participation in events over the last 4 years, not being able to participate, I think that it makes organizers think, how can they put on the best product? And to do so, you need the best players. And so it could impact that. But I know that Europe was having sort of similar issues with immigration as well over the last, in the last couple of years, where the Indian team for League of Legends wasn't able to sort of participate in one of their sort of tournaments because they were denied status. Now, I don't understand their system at all, but I thought it was a fun fact. But we do see the tournaments sort of sprouting everywhere. I think that currently people look at South Korea as the kings of esports. And esports have been so accepted and embraced by the population. The government actually put on they have a sort of blackout period from midnight to 6 a.m. where people under the age of 16 aren't allowed to participate, can't log on to their computers at night to play. Because they had such a problem with people playing, all day and night, and so they had to put sort of a block on. Well, you're all denied internet access from midnight to 6, and that's sort of the pinnacle, I think, of esports, and they've embraced it and they accept it and bring a lot of people in to participate. And I feel like the United States is falling behind because of that, and we're starting to see a lot more attention being paid to. Or being a lot more of the tournaments being played in Asia or in Europe, where they have a little bit more lax blacks immigration surrounding esports, or a little more acceptance of esports. So it kind of reminds me of chess, and I make the analogy between chess and esports all the time. The United States never really embraced chess as a sport, and then we fell way behind, and Bobby Fischer sort of made his appearance, and then after that we had another dead spot in the international chess scene. And it came to the point where the United States said, okay, we are going to allow chess athletes the P1A visa. The United States Chess Association, the Players Association for Chess, fought and had these open communications with the USCIS, and was able to sort of earn them access. And so through that, I think that chess is now we're starting to see a little bit more of a competitive atmosphere, but we're so far behind just in infrastructure with chess that I see esports taking the same route. It's not a sport, it's not a sport, it's not a sport. And then when it comes to Paris, like, we won't have a competitive scene or a competitive team on the scene.
Okay, I have one last question for you, because then somebody else should ask a question. The number of American universities that are embracing esports and esports teams, do you think that will have an influence on visas and the determination of esport athletes or performers, or do you think that that'll make a difference? Because they are part of university teams, and as you know, to be successful in any sport in the United States, you must have international athletes.
Right, so I do think we're going to see it have an impact on esport participation, and unfortunately I don't remember the sort of immigration code specific to students, but you can get like sort of graduate, international graduate, and then they come in and they're able to sort of work under a specific visa. And I think that we can see that sort of leading to this. But I think that just as we see universities embracing esports more, I think it'll lead to more general acceptance from the population. We say, like, well, if they're doing it in the NCAA, then they're likely to continue, then it must be a real thing. And it sort of earns that like thumbs up from society, and then I think we'll see the push, similar to chess, to get the P1A visa.
Okay. Just because of the numbers.
Right, I think that eventually, when you see how much, I mean, if it's worth a $1.5 billion and 600 million people are watching it and 100 million for the World Championships, it's very similar to the viewership of football or basketball or baseball for their World Series, or soccer, and then you say, well, maybe it's really here. So I think that through that we'll see a lot of acceptance. Trevor?
If you could go pro in one esport, what would it be?
For me, it would be commentating.
Okay.
I'm just way too old to try and get into any of those, unless I can go back to like Dance Dance Revolution. And then I think DDR is the sport for me.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that that's about as far as I can take it. So we have any other questions?
Perhaps. This is an interesting question, or an interesting comparison between potential esports student athletes and international esports student athletes. The more general consideration is that even international student athletes, because they are ostensibly amateur, they are admitted to the United States under the same, with the same visa as traditional international students, the F1 visa, which does not allow students to actually work off campus. So one of the consequences of, among other things, the fair pay to play act in California, and it's the ideas regarding compensating student athletes will open the question of how to treat international student athletes who now all of a sudden will be placed in different situations. And also more generally, the taxation rates do not depend on visa status, but they depend on residency. So permanent residents are taxed differently than temporary residents and temporary visitors. I'm curious, why were, at the beginning you mentioned some e-athletes who, thank you, yes, who were denied entry in the United States. Why were they denied?
For all three of these, they applied for their P1A visas, and then they were sort of denied on the status that they weren't athletes, and that the event they were competing in was a sport. And so our sort of judge and jury here said that, yeah, it's not a sport, and they're not athletes, and so they don't meet the proper qualifications for the P1A visa. Like performing at a specific athletic competition, athletic being the key sort of term there, whether it was individually as part of a team, and then at the internationally recognized level. So they were all denied just because they were said to not be. Now, kind of further that story, they all appealed the decision, and First Echo Fox, in their appeal, their player won. His appeal was able to compete at a later stage in the tournaments, and so they were able to sort of join in the next league. But both Unicorns of Love and Rock at the international teams, their athletes were denied a second time, and then they had to wait or apply under a separate visa. But yeah, it just came down to the sort of term of athlete and athletic competition.
I guess it's, you probably know, in general terms, visas are, one of the characteristics of visas are whether they are short-term, whether they are meant for short-term or long-term visas. So for instance, you mentioned H-1B visas. And that is a visa directed to those, so there are time limits. So H-1B, it's usually granted for 3 years, then it can be renewed for another 3 years, and then either the person secures permanent residence in the United States, or that visa expires and cannot be renewed. So this would be a consideration. But I find it curious that, and I was actually looking up numbers, there are fewer O visas are awarded or granted every year than P visas. So isn't it a bit counterintuitive to perhaps suggest a more restrictive visa as an alternative to
I think that part of the visas awarded and O visas comes down to the number of people who are applying for them. If you're looking at the P visa here, a lot of people might apply, and so you might have a higher number of acceptance. But I think that if people were to apply more for the O1B visa, we might see a higher number. I think it's you can only cook as many eggs as you have, sort of situation. And so we can only accept as many people who are applying that reach these sort of extraordinary ability or extraordinary achievements areas. Now, with this research, I think the biggest thing, or the most beneficial thing would be the sort of education and the sort of open discussions between the stakeholders of esports and the government and its employees, to try and educate them on and to come up with a more consistent theme. But the other half of the research was saying, if the P visa isn't available to you, if you're denied that, then what is your best second option? And so I think that with if 50% of P visas are accepted, 50% are denied, those 50% could get in through an O1B or an O1A visa. I think that might be, I think that would be the most beneficial thing for the participants. But this is a little bit more of a, limited, I think, or more specialized visas, the O1A and the O1Bs. There is another visa, it's a P3 visa, and that's for cultural, like sort of cultural educations, or for cultural endeavors, and I think that that's also a very adequate visa. I haven't mentioned that one yet because I haven't finished the write-up on it, and so I still have a lot more research to do in that area. But that was one that was brought to my attention recently. It's the P3 visa, which also might be a fine fit if you were to sort of pitch esports as a cultural, like something cultural. There's an esport culture, the viewership culture maybe being different than general society, and these sort of participants are cultural performers and not so much athletes, or could come as like coaching or trainers associated with sport. But again, I'm not 100% on the P3 visa yet, so still working on that.
I mean, I wonder if you would want to, when you craft recommendations, I wouldn't try to think of how to get the best players to enter the country, but I would try to figure out how to get what is the lowest bar you need to meet. It's sure, Zlatan Ibrahimovic is not a problem. He will enter the country one way or another because he was nominated for 10 Golden Ball Awards. So that's your awards there. Now, the real question is, well, how do you get the Venezuelan minor league catcher to enter the country? So again, I would not necessarily try to find accommodation for the best players. I would try to find accommodations that suit all players looking to enter a tournament. So it's to me using comparing esports champions to Academy Award winners. Sure, I mean, yes, if you compare the champion, but what about the second string game?
Right.
I don't know if that would, I don't know how that would work, comparing them to Academy Award winners. So this might be tricky, but
yeah, I think that my only hope there, or sort of the approach that I was hoping for taking, that I was hoping would stick, is more of the standard that we set. So if an Academy Award winner, like I think Meryl Streep maybe comes to, she's probably won an Academy, she's won everything. And so if you compare her to maybe somebody like Kristen Stewart, like different levels, but they're both kind of the difference between Kristen Stewart and an average, very low actress maybe is not that high, but Kristen Stewart would say is a middling actress versus the average streamer who has 27, and then the lower sort of professionals all having 100,000 viewers a year. Sort of showing that in terms of getting distinction could be the difference between me as a baseball player and the Venezuelan minor league catcher. But I understand what you're saying, and I think that still got a lot of work left to do. So I appreciate the insight.